The courtroom smelled like cold marble and stale tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped tight in my lap, knuckles white, while my ex-husband held court like a politician at a press conference. He smiled too wide, laughed too loud, wore his best suit and that smug expression he used to reserve for business meetings when he closed a deal. I'd seen it 100 times before, but today it was aimed at me. We hadn't spoken since I moved out, not directly. The lawyers had handled everything. He'd made sure of that. After all, Derek was a man who liked to control the narrative, and he was doing just that. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something, and the two chuckled. The judge hadn't even walked in yet. I swallowed hard and tried to focus on my attorney's voice beside me, calm and measured. "You're doing great," she whispered. "Let him talk. Let him overplay his hand." I nodded but didn't believe her. This wasn't just a divorce. This was the final act of a marriage that had slowly poisoned me over 6 years. Not with fists, not even with words most of the time. With subtle, eroding comments. With gaslighting. So sophisticated it took me years to see it for what it was. With silence when I begged for love. With punishment when I dared to shine. Now, here he was. Smiling. Confident. Ready to take everything he could get. The house, the savings, even the car I'd driven since college. I was supposed to feel broken. I was supposed to cower. But I had one thing he didn't know. One screenshot. And when the time was right, I'd show it. The door opened, and the judge entered. A woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and no tolerance for theatrics. Everyone rose. Derek adjusted his tie like he was greeting royalty. I barely looked up. We sat. The court clerk began the formalities. Then Derek's attorney stood. Confident. Polished. She spoke as if this were already decided. "Your Honor, my client has been more than generous throughout these proceedings. He has offered Ms. Langley a settlement that exceeds the standard allocation in this county. Despite this, she has continued to make unreasonable demands." I bit my tongue. She continued, detailing numbers, assets, bank statements, estimates, a value. Then came the character assassination. "My client has documentation that Ms. Langley was emotionally unstable during their marriage, which affected their shared finances and created an uncooperative household environment. We will provide emails and text records indicating erratic behavior, including verbal threats, failure to meet household obligations, and unsanctioned spending habits." I felt my face burn. My attorney stood, objected, and the judge held up a hand. "Let's proceed calmly and with facts, not accusations." But the seed had been planted, and Derek sat there, arms crossed, eyes flicking toward me like he was watching a performance. He thought he was winning. He thought he had buried me beneath fake concern and fabricated evidence. He didn't know that the very thing he'd sent, the very thing he'd meant to break, Missy, was the thing that would shatter his credibility. 3 months earlier, during one of our final text exchanges before the lawyers took over, he had slipped. In his arrogance, he sent me a message that revealed more than he intended. He admitted, almost casually, to manipulating our joint account. Said I was too emotional to manage money, so he adjusted things without telling me. He followed it up with, "You'll thank me later." He deleted it minutes after, but I'd already taken a screenshot, backed it up to the cloud, printed a copy and sent it to my lawyer. We'd been holding it. Waiting. Now, as his attorney began to close her statement, my lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we would like to submit supplemental evidence rebutting these claims and providing direct documentation of financial misconduct on the part of Mr. Langley." Derek's smile faltered. The judge nodded. "Proceed." My lawyer walked to the clerk and handed over a document. The room was quiet except for the rustle of paper. The judge read, then read it again, then looked up. "Mr. Langley, is this your communication?" He shifted. "I'd have to see." She turned the paper. "It's your phone number, your name. A direct admission of mismanagement of marital assets." His lawyer interjected. "That may have been taken out of context, but the damage was done." The judge leaned forward. "I don't tolerate games in my courtroom." and I certainly don't tolerate attempts to weaponize false narratives against someone who appears to have kept impeccable documentation. I finally looked up and met his eyes. He didn't look smug now. He looked pale, and for the first time in years, I felt taller than him. The room felt frozen in the seconds after the judge's rebuke. Derek's lawyer sat down slowly, her previous confidence reduced to tight lips and a flicker of worry behind her professional composure. Derek leaned forward, elbows on the table, as if proximity might somehow change the outcome written on that printed screenshot. I sat very still. For months, I had imagined this moment, but never quite like this. I had pictured shouting, tears, confessions, but this was cleaner, sharper. A quiet unraveling of a man who had built his life around manipulation and power. And all it took was his own words. The judge cleared her throat. We'll take a 15-minute recess to allow all parties to review the new evidence. The gavel echoed through the courtroom. I stood slowly, and as I turned, I caught Derek's eyes again. There was panic there now. But more than that. Confusion. As if he couldn't quite understand how he'd lost control of the narrative, because men like Derek don't believe they can lose. Out in the hallway, my lawyer handed me a bottle of water and whispered, "Perfect timing. You stayed composed. That's going to matter." "I feel like I'm going to throw up," I said honestly. "You won't. You're too strong for that." I took a sip. My hands were shaking. People passed us, lawyers, clients, clerks, but I felt outside of it all. My heart was racing, not from fear, but adrenaline. For so long, Derek had lived in my head like a shadow. He had turned every conversation into a trap, every disagreement into a performance. But now the spotlight had shifted, and I had receipts. Back inside, the judge wasted no time. "I've reviewed the content of the submitted message, and I find it to be materially relevant to this hearing. Mr. Langley, do you contest the authenticity of this document?" Derek glanced at his lawyer, who gave the smallest shake of her head. "No, Your Honor," he muttered. "Then we'll adjust the review of the financial arrangements accordingly." What followed was the cold execution of legal justice. The judge moved methodically through our list of disputed assets, the house, the accounts, the car. For each item, she referred back to the screenshot, her notes, and the law. The house, which Derek had claimed he solely invested in, was revealed to be half-funded by savings I had inherited from my grandmother. The judge cited documentation I had provided early in the process, something Derek assumed wouldn't hold up. But now, paired with the screenshot, it painted a much clearer picture. The judge turned back to him. "You attempted to shift financial control under the guise of caretaking. That's not just unethical, it's manipulative and deeply concerning." Derek's lawyer barely raised an objection anymore. By the time the ruling was read, I had been granted equal ownership of the house, full access to the joint savings, to be split equally, and the car. But more than that, I had been granted something intangible yet priceless: credibility, dignity, truth. After the session, Derek approached me in the hallway. Alone. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was finally seeing him without the filter of fear. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," he said. "What? Telling the truth?" He looked around, as if the walls themselves were listening. "I didn't mean it like that. I just thought you'd let it go." I tilted my head. "You thought I'd let you win?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stuffed his hands in his pockets and offered a weak shrug. "Well, it's over now." I looked him in the eye. "No, Derek, it's just beginning." He frowned. "I'm not talking about revenge. I'm talking about peace. Mine. I've spent years carrying the weight of your lies, your control, your moods. And today, I put it down." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't get it. He never would. And that was okay. That night, I sat on the porch of the home I had almost lost. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and lavender. I sipped a glass of wine. not to forget, but to honor the moment. I had protected myself. I had refused to be erased. I had trusted my instincts, my memory, my evidence, and I had won. Not just in court, but inside. Where it mattered. More. Where the healing began. Where I finally remembered who I was. The silence after the court victory wasn't peaceful. At first I thought it was. The absence of Derek's voice, no texts, no emails, no unexpected visits, felt like stepping into fresh air after years underwater. But the quiet quickly began to hum with something else, something darker, a tension that crawled under my skin. Because Derek was never the kind of man who accepted defeat quietly. He didn't yell or throw things. That was never his style. He calculated, he performed, and when the spotlight turned away, he planned. That was the man I had married, and the man who had just been cornered by a judge in front of a courtroom full of witnesses. I knew he wouldn't forget that humiliation, and I knew he wouldn't let me forget it either. I tried to live normally. I repainted the living room. I boxed up things that held his scent and donated them. I went back to the yoga class I used to love before he made fun of it so often I quit. I reconnected with friends, slowly, cautiously, and relearned how to take up space in my own home. But even in the quietest moments, I could feel his shadow. It was in the mailbox, when I opened letters twice to make sure nothing was hidden inside. It was in the car, when I looked in the rearview mirror a little too often at night. It was in my inbox when I flinched every time an unknown number sent a message. My therapist said it was trauma, that my nervous system had spent years on high, alert, and needed time to recalibrate. But how do I relax, I asked, when I know he's not done? She nodded, understanding. You don't relax, you prepare, you stay calm, you build strength from the inside out, and when he tries again, you'll be ready. The first sign came on a Wednesday. A mutual friend, one of the few who hadn't picked sides, called me out of the blue. "Hey," she said, her voice tight. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but Derek's been posting things online." I sat up. "What kind of things?" "He's implying you faked the screenshot, that you lied in court, that the judge was biased. It's all vague, but it's nasty. And he's got people commenting, sharing." I closed my eyes. Of course, he wouldn't challenge the ruling directly. That would risk legal consequences. But he'd chip away at the truth, undermine it socially, turn perception into his new courtroom. He also said you had a breakdown a few years ago, that you were emotionally unstable during your marriage. I laughed bitterly. He means the time I cried in the shower after he disappeared for 2 days without telling me where he was. She didn't laugh. "I just thought you should." "No," she said softly. "And for what it's worth, I believe you. Always did." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the silence again. But this time I wasn't afraid. I was angry. That night I drafted a post, not to defend myself, not directly, but to tell my story, on my terms. I wrote about the court, the evidence, the manipulation. I didn't name him. I didn't insult him. I didn't ask for pity. I told the truth and then I logged off. I didn't need to watch the comments roll in. I didn't need to argue with trolls. I had said what I needed to say, and if anyone needed proof, the court records were public. By morning, my post had been shared dozens of times. People I hadn't heard from in years messaged me quietly, some apologizing for doubting me, some sharing their own stories. And Derek? He went quiet, which only meant one thing. He was planning his next move. 2 days passed, then 4, then a week. No word from Derek, no new posts, no veiled attacks through mutual acquaintances, just silence. But it wasn't over. I knew it deep in my bones, that crawling sensation you get when a storm is close but hasn't broken yet. Then, it came. A formal letter, delivered by courier. From Derek's new attorney, he was filing a motion to appeal the financial division of assets, citing new evidence and unethical behavior by opposing counsel. It was laughable, at best a stall tactic, at worst a desperate attempt to reset the game board he no longer controlled. My lawyer called me immediately. "Don't panic," she said. "This is smoke, not fire. He doesn't have grounds, and no real judge will waste time on this." But that wasn't the point. Derek wasn't trying to win the case. He was trying to drain me, emotionally, financially, spiritually. And worse, he was trying to bait me into reacting like the woman he had painted in court, the unstable ex-wife, the emotional mess, the irrational accuser. I wouldn't give him that. Still, I was rattled. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the house went dark. I scrolled through our old texts, the ones I had archived out of caution. I reread the cruel ones, the manipulative ones, the sweet ones too. The ones he used to soften me up before demanding more than I could give. It was like rereading a novel I thought I'd lived, but now realized had been written by someone else. I found another message I'd forgotten about. 6 months before the divorce. "You better be careful how you talk to me," he'd written, "because I know things about you that would ruin you if I ever had to go to court." I stared at that line for a long time, not because I was afraid, but because I finally saw it for what it was, a man bluffing with a hand he never had. The next week, we were summoned for a hearing regarding the appeal. It was brief. The judge reviewed Derek's new evidence, a handful of unrelated screenshots, half of which were out of context, and one supposed witness testimony from a friend who had already contradicted herself publicly on social media. It took less than 20 minutes for the judge to dismiss the appeal as frivolous and lacking legal foundation. Derek didn't show up in person. Only his lawyer. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Afterward, I walked out of the courthouse and took a deep breath. It was over. Really over now. No more tactics, no more bait, no more vague threats. He had played his last card and it had crumbled in his hand. I thought I'd feel elated, victorious. But instead I felt free, like I had been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to inhale without fear. That night, I opened the windows. I turned on music. I danced barefoot in my kitchen. Not for anyone, not for social media, not even to prove a point, just for me. Because for the first time in a long time, my house, the one he tried to take, the one he used to haunt, was mine again. And it was quiet. But this time, the quiet didn't feel dangerous. It felt like peace. The silence that followed the final hearing was different. It wasn't sharp like fear or tense like suspense. It was weightless. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to dread gnawing at my chest. My shoulders weren't clenched by default. The house didn't echo with memories I was trying to erase. It was strange how peace didn't arrive like a celebration, but like a quiet stranger who sits next to you and lets you breathe. But breathing again didn't mean I was healed. It meant I had space to begin. I started with the house, not because I cared about decor. Derek had drained all the joy from that long ago, but because the house had been his stage. Every wall, every couch, every curtain had been a prop in his control. Rearranging the space felt like reclaiming my own script. I got rid of the cold gray couch he insisted we buy because it hid stains, as if life was meant to be hidden. Painted over the sterile white walls in the bedroom with deep, calming blue. I removed the mirror in the hallway where he used to stand and criticize his hair. Or mine. I didn't replace it. For the first time, I didn't need to constantly check how I looked through someone else's eyes, but objects were easy. The hard part came at night, in the stillness, when the adrenaline finally stopped pumping and the memory of who I had become under his thumb came creeping back. I found myself standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at a glass of water, asking myself questions I wasn't ready to answer. Why? Did I stay? How much of me is real? What does love look like without fear? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew I wanted to find them. That's when I began journaling again. Not the kind of entries I used to write when I was with him. The ones that tiptoed around the truth, full of, maybe I overreacted and he didn't mean it that way. Now I wrote honestly, brutally. I wrote about the day he told me I was lucky someone like him would marry me. I wrote about the night I cried in the bathroom for 2 hours while he laughed with friends downstairs. I wrote about the slow, subtle erosion, how I became smaller over time, not because he told me to, but because I learned it was safer to disappear than to take up space. Every page was a wound reopening, but every sentence bled the poison out. One day, while cleaning the attic, I found a dusty box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a journal. From our first year of marriage, the entries shocked me. Not because I didn't remember writing them, but because I realized how early the signs were there, before the anger, before the screenshots, before the courtroom. "I think he's pulling away," one entry said. I apologized again. I don't even remember what for. "Maybe if I'm a little quieter, a little more supportive, he'll come back." I sat on the attic floor with the journal in my lap for over an hour, not crying, not angry, just stunned at how much I had taught myself to endure. That night, something shifted in me. I wasn't the woman in that journal anymore, and maybe, just maybe, someone out there was still living in her pages, waiting for a reason to believe she wasn't crazy, or alone, or weak. So I opened my laptop, and I wrote again. This time not for myself, but for her, the woman who needed to know that one screenshot could change everything. That truth didn't need to shout to be heard. That healing doesn't mean erasing the past, but reclaiming your place in the present. And I hit publish. I didn't expect it to go viral. I didn't write it for attention. But within a day I had messages from strangers, women, men, even teenagers. People who had been gaslit, shamed, silenced, and finally saw their pain in someone else's story. Didn't make me famous. It made me real. And for the first time, that was enough. The messages didn't stop. At first it was one or two, quiet, grateful replies from people I didn't know. Then dozens, then hundreds. Some came in the middle of the night. Some were long, raw confessions. Others were short. "Thank you." I thought it was just me. Each one landed like a small weight in my chest. Heavy, not because they hurt, but because they mattered. Every story cracked something open in me. A sisterhood I hadn't known I needed was forming in real time, woman by woman, voice by voice, and with each new message, the shame I had carried, the one I thought would stick to me forever like a tattoo, started to dissolve. I hadn't just survived Derek, I had witnessed him. And now, others were bearing witness too. There was one message that stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Claire. She wrote, "He sounds just like my ex. The charming ones always do." I never got to show my screenshot. I deleted everything after he convinced me I was paranoid. "Your story gave me back a piece of myself." That line, "He convinced me I was paranoid," hit me harder than I expected, because I remembered. I remembered the night I told Derek I didn't like how close he stood to his assistant, how he laughed and said I was insecure, how I apologized and to him for being too emotional. I remembered the day I asked why he hadn't come home until 3 a.m., how he rolled his eyes and said I was imagining things, how I made him dinner the next day just to make peace. I remembered how easy it was to rewrite reality when the person you love holds the pen. Claire's message reminded me. I almost deleted my screenshots too. But something in me, some flicker of intuition I hadn't yet crushed, told me to save them, and that one choice had changed everything. By the end of the week, I decided to take the writing further. Not just blogs, not just posts, a book. I didn't know if anyone would publish it or even read it, but I knew this. I couldn't keep this story locked inside. Not for me, not for the Claires of the world, not for the women still in the thick of it, wondering if love should make them feel so small. I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't a legal expert. I was something else, a survivor with a voice, and that was enough. Writing the book was harder than I expected, not because I didn't know what to say, but because every chapter meant revisiting the ones he wrote in. My life. The night he said I was lucky to be chosen. The day he refused to come to my graduation because he didn't feel like clapping for things that didn't benefit him. The time he told me my laugh was too much in front of his friends, and I didn't laugh the rest of the evening. None of those moments left bruises. But they left marks. They shaped how I walked into rooms, how I spoke, how I dressed, how I shrank. But writing gave me back something I didn't know I had lost, my shape. Word by word, I began to take up space again. I didn't tell many people about the book, just my therapist, my best friend, and one night, timidly, my son. He was old enough to understand, old enough to remember, and old enough now to ask real questions. "Why did you stay with Dad so long?" he asked one evening gently. I froze. Then I told him the truth. Because when someone breaks you slowly, it doesn't feel like breaking. It feels like bending. And I thought if I bent just a little more, I could keep the peace. He nodded. Then he said something I'll never forget. "But you didn't break. You got out. And now you're helping people. That's kind of like being a superhero." Tears came before I could stop them, not because of what he said, but because I finally believed it might be true. Months passed. The manuscript grew, and one day a publisher responded. They wanted to meet. I went to the meeting with trembling hands and a steady heart, not because I needed validation, but because I was ready to walk through a door that once felt sealed shut. They read the first chapters. They asked about the title. I smiled and said, "I don't have one yet, but I know how it ends." And that was enough. That night I sat on my porch under a quiet sky. I thought about all the women like Claire, like me, and I made a promise. I wouldn't waste my second chance at a voice. Because when the truth is told, not in a courtroom, not to hurt someone, but to set yourself free, it doesn't just heal you. It calls others home too. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, stirring honey into my tea when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but something nudged me. A quiet intuition, the same one that had whispered, "Save that screenshot" long ago. "Hello? Is this Julia Montgomery?" "Yes. This is Detective Lawson with the County Sheriff's Office. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding your ex-husband, Derek Taylor." The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered against the counter. My first thought wasn't what did he do, it was what now. The meeting was brief but jarring. Apparently, Derek had been named in a fraud investigation. A former business partner had come forward with financial records, and my name was on some of them. I blinked. "I had no idea," I said, and it was the truth. But it didn't matter. Derek had used my name, my signature, my old credentials, from when we were still married. Documents I never remembered signing, papers I hadn't seen in years. "You're not under suspicion," the detective assured me. "But we'll need your cooperation." For the second time in a year, I found myself in a legal storm I didn't ask for, only this time I wasn't walking in blind. I went home and sat at my desk, heart racing, fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't fear of being guilty. It was the fear of being dragged back, of having his darkness pull at me again, trying to rewrite the narrative I had worked so hard to escape. But I breathed, and I reminded myself, I have my words now. I have my story. I opened the folder where I had kept everything, the divorce papers, the digital copies of the court documents, even a backup of that crucial screenshot. Everything was organized, color-coded, dated. Derek may have thought I would stay broken, but I had rebuilt myself with structure and truth, and I wasn't afraid of his shadows anymore. That night, after putting my son to bed, I sat outside with my laptop and opened my manuscript. I reread the chapters that told our story, not to relive it, but to remember how far I'd come. I added a new paragraph. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a landscape you learn to walk, and sometimes the shadows come back in, but this time you know where the light switch is. It felt right, because that was what this was, a test of whether I'd really changed, whether I would shrink again or stand tall. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. Rachel had been my rock during the divorce, and seeing her again brought both comfort and urgency. Looks like Derek never learned, she said, flipping through the documents. No, I said quietly. But I did, she smiled. Let's keep you protected. We made a plan. Statements, affidavits, proof of separation, verification of signatures. Rachel reassured me that legally I was in the clear, but emotionally, that was different. Because the truth was, this wasn't about fraud. Not really. It was about him trying to prove he still had a grip on my life. But he didn't, and the proof came days later in the form of an unexpected email. Subject: Thank you, from my daughter and me. It was from a woman I'd never met. A mother, like me. She had read my blog and recognized herself in my story. Her daughter had shown it to her, she said, after years of watching her live in quiet misery. I thought I was teaching her strength by staying, she wrote. Turns out I was teaching her fear. Your words gave me the courage to leave. We packed our bags last night. I'm writing this from a motel room and I've never breathed so deeply. I read it 3 times, tears rolling down my face. Then I whispered to the night, thank you. Not for the pain, but for the purpose it had grown into. The investigation into Derek's fraud case didn't explode into headlines, but it rippled through our town like a subtle earthquake, quiet, unseen. But nothing was quite the same afterward. People who once looked at him with admiration began to blink twice. His charm no longer shielded him. The smirk that once disarmed judges and discredited me now looked thinner, strained, like it was trying too hard to hold itself together. I didn't feel victorious. I felt still. And that stillness, after so many years of tension, of coiled silence and walking on glass, was the closest thing to peace I'd ever known. But Derek wasn't done. His pride had been bruised in public, and that to him was unforgivable. He didn't call. He didn't send letters. He didn't even try to contact our son. What he did was worse. He started whispering to mutual friends, to former neighbors, to anyone who would still listen. She's exaggerating. She twisted the whole story. She's using our son for sympathy. She always wanted to be famous. It was subtle, cowardly, and I knew why he was doing it, to shift the story just enough so that when the truth fully emerged, people would hesitate. That moment of hesitation in his mind was a win, but I had learned something he never would. You don't need everyone to believe you. You just need to stop believing them. The publisher moved forward with the book. We chose a title together. A simple one. One screenshot. They said it was powerful because it meant different things to different people. For some, it meant digital proof. For others, it meant the single moment that changed the trajectory of their silence. For me, it meant both. When the cover design was finalized, they asked if I wanted my full name on the book. I hesitated. For a second, the old fear flickered. What if Derek used this against me? What if people judged me? What if strangers thought I was doing it for attention? But then I thought of Claire, of the mother and daughter in the motel room, of my own son, who had once called me a superhero, and I nodded. Yes, full name. Julia Montgomery. It was the first time in years I claimed my own name without apology. The day the book launched, I kept my expectations low. I didn't plan a party. I didn't post countdowns. I just lit a candle, sat in my reading chair, and waited. I didn't wait for sales. I waited for the silence, the kind that comes after you've told your truth. Not to win, not to punish, but to be free. And the silence came, and it was warm. Then, one by one, the messages began to pour in again. Not just from survivors, from therapists, from daughters who had watched their mothers fade into compliance, from men who realized they'd crossed lines they never questioned, from book clubs, from high schools, from shelters. One woman wrote, "I read your book in one sitting. Then I walked into my daughter's room and held her for 10 minutes. I never want her to feel like she has to shrink for love." Another wrote, "I'm not ready to leave yet. but I'm saving my screenshots. And that's a start. And one simply said, I didn't know I was allowed to speak. There was no viral moment, no daytime interview, no headline, just stories. Quiet ones, sturdy ones, and that to me was more powerful than any courtroom win. Because while Derek was still trying to manipulate perception, I was helping others reshape reality, their own. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a small event for domestic abuse awareness. When I walked onto the stage, I felt my knees shake, not from fear, but from the overwhelming truth of where I was standing, not hiding, not surviving, living, loudly. I told my story, not with fire, but with clarity. I talked about the courtroom, about the screenshot, about the lies and the silence and the breaking. But more than anything, I talked about rebuilding. And when I finished, a young woman in the front row stood up and said, I'm leaving tonight because of this, and the room stood with her. The email came from a well-known journalist. I read it twice, thinking it must be spam. But no, it was real, polished, professional. They had read my book. They were producing a live panel episode on modern narratives, divorce, abuse, and digital truth, and wanted me to appear alongside two other guests, one a therapist, the other Derek. I felt the air punch out of my lungs. I read the line again. We've also extended an invitation to Mr. Derek Taylor for his perspective. Perspective, as if this were a debate, as if my life, my trauma, my documentation was a take, to be challenged like a hot topic on cable news. For a moment, I was ready to decline, slam the laptop shut, erase the message, but I didn't. Instead, I forwarded it to Rachel, my lawyer, and called her 5 minutes later. Rachel's voice was firm. You don't have to do this, Julia. You owe no one a public confrontation. No, I said. But what if this helps someone? What if showing up, calm, clear, unshaken, is what breaks the cycle for someone watching? She was silent for a beat. Then you do it, but on your terms. Full legal protection, no ambushes. And that became our strategy. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Rachel negotiated everything, questions in advance, no surprises, moderators with experience in trauma-informed interviewing. My therapist coached me through what to expect emotionally. My publisher was cautious but supportive. Still, the knot in my stomach grew tighter with every passing hour. I wasn't afraid of Derek, not anymore. I was afraid of the game, because he didn't need to scream or insult me to harm me. All he had to do was smile the right way, laugh at the right moment, twist just enough truth to plant a seed of doubt in the audience. I knew that playbook, and I refused to let it work again. The night before the interview, I sat with my son. He was older. Now, he understood more than I gave him credit for. I'm going on a show tomorrow, I said, to talk about the book, and Dad might be there too. He looked up from his homework, eyes wide. Do you have to? No, but I want to. He nodded slowly, then asked, Are you going to tell the truth? It was such a simple question, but it landed like a stone in a still pond. Yes, I said. Always. And then he did something I'll never forget. He stood up, walked over, and hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, he whispered, and for the first time, I realized something strange. Even if the world turned its back on me tomorrow, this would be enough. The studio was cold. The lights buzzed above me, and a production assistant dabbed my forehead with a tissue before we went live. Derek hadn't arrived yet. The therapist, Dr. Ramirez, smiled warmly at me. You're doing something brave, she said, even if you feel shaky. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. 3 minutes to air, and then he walked in. Same confident stride, same tailored suit, same casual charm that once swept people off their feet, including me. He saw me, paused, nodded. I nodded back, but something had shifted. There was no fear in my chest, no shrinking, just a strange, quiet observation. He looked smaller, not physically, but in spirit, like someone who had lost the script and didn't know who to be without it. The host welcomed us, introductions were made, cameras rolled, and the show began. Tonight, we explore the complicated intersections of truth, memory, and technology in modern relationships. Our guest, Julia Montgomery, author of One Screenshot, has written candidly about her experience surviving psychological abuse. Also joining us is Derek Taylor, who has offered his own account of the events described in the book. I barely heard the rest. I was already focused. Not on him, but on the people watching. The quiet woman folding laundry with the TV on. The teenager scrolling past the channel and pausing. The father with a daughter who hasn't spoken to him in weeks. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to be heard. The cameras were rolling, but I barely noticed them anymore. The lights, the audience, even the moderator's voice. It all faded into the background as Derek began to speak. Calm, collected, measured. I think, he said, that there are always two sides to a story. And while I understand Julia's perspective, I also feel that some things have been misrepresented. He glanced at me, not with rage, but with the same charming smirk that used to disarm. I was never abusive, he continued. We had disagreements, like any couple, but I never intended to hurt her. I think maybe she misread things, and it spiraled. Classic. Gaslight 101. Deny, minimize, shift the blame. I sat still, hands in my lap, pulse steady, but inside, I could feel the audience's uncertainty. I could feel the flicker of doubt he was trying to spread. He was good at this. Too good. And then the moderator turned to me. Julia, she said gently, how do you respond to that? I didn't look at Derek. I looked straight at the camera. Because I wasn't talking to him, I was talking to them. I didn't write One Screenshot to convince anyone I was right, I began. I wrote it because for years I thought I was crazy. I paused. Just long enough. I was told I was imagining things, overreacting, that no one else saw what I saw. So I stayed silent. I minimized my own pain. And then one day, I found a faux message, a digital trace of the truth. And suddenly I realized I wasn't losing my mind, I was losing my voice. I reached for my water. My hands didn't shake. I don't need to debate Derek's character. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because someone watching this right now is questioning her own memory, wondering if she deserves the doubt she's receiving. I want her to know. She doesn't. There was a silence in the room. Not the awkward kind. The heavy, reverent kind. Derek leaned forward. But don't you think, he said carefully, that memory is subjective? That maybe you interpreted things through a filter of fear? I interrupted. He blinked. Yes, I continued. Fear is a powerful filter. So is trauma. But here's what isn't subjective. Timestamps, threats made in writing, patterns of isolation, financial control, emotional manipulation. Those aren't memories. Those are facts. I turned again to the moderator. If we treat abuse like a philosophical discussion, we let it hide behind clever words. But abuse isn't abstract. It's precise. It has language. And that language is silence, confusion, guilt. There was a long pause. Then the therapist on the panel, Dr. Ramirez, leaned in. Julia, she said softly, thank you. You just gave a masterclass in truth-telling under pressure. And then she looked at Derek. With all due respect, she added, there's a difference between discomfort and defamation. What I heard from you was not accountability. It was defense. And when someone shares their survival story, the response isn't, that's not how I remember it. The response is, I'm listening. Derek shifted in his seat. The smirk faltered. For the first time, he didn't have a follow-up. After the show, people approached me, crew members, viewers, even the moderator herself. You changed the air in that room, she said. It was like something sacred passed through. But the moment that stayed with me came later. In the hallway, just before I left the studio, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was Derek. He didn't speak right away. Then he said, "You won." I stared at him for a long time, and then I said something I hadn't planned. This was never about winning. It was about ending, and I walked away. That night, I sat with my son again. He'd watched the episode with a family friend while I was at the studio. When I came home, he hugged me tighter than usual. "You looked strong," he said. "I felt strong," I replied. "Are you glad you did it?" I thought about the woman watching from her living room, the teenage girl realizing her doubts were valid, the man sitting in a dark room, finally questioning his own behavior. I nodded. "I am." The episode aired on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, my inbox had over 400 unread messages. Some were short. "Thank you. I believe you. You gave me courage." Others were pages long. Stories of marriages that looked perfect on Instagram, but were prisons behind closed doors. Stories of fathers whose silence had cost them their daughters. Of mothers who'd told their kids to just endure a little longer, and now couldn't sleep at night. There was something about seeing abuse discussed so publicly, so calmly, so unapologetically, that gave people permission to feel, permission to remember, permission to speak. That weekend, the episode was reposted by advocacy groups. Clips went viral. The segment where I interrupted Derek mid-sentence, "Fear? Yes. Fear is a powerful filter," became a soundbite on TikTok. But the fame meant nothing to me. It wasn't fame. It was validation. Not of me, but of the reality I had lived. The one I had questioned for so long. And then late Sunday evening, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly 12 years. Her name was Madeline. She had dated Derek before me. "Julia," the message began, "I saw your interview. I haven't stopped crying." She described a pattern so familiar it made my breath catch. The charm, the slow isolation, the need to always be right, the blame that landed like feathers but cut like knives. "I thought I was crazy," she wrote. "But seeing you speak, calm, clear, strong, made me realize I had just been quiet too long. I've carried shame for a decade for something I didn't cause. I want to let it go now." She asked to meet. I agreed. We chose a small coffee shop downtown. When I walked in and saw her, it felt like a mirror of an old self, a version of me before the storm. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her mug, but her eyes were steady. "I just needed to say thank you in person," she said. "You don't owe me thanks," I replied. "We survived the same man. That's a bond I never wanted, but I'll honor it." She smiled. A broken one, but real. We talked for hours, not just about Derek, but about who we had become despite him. "I kept wondering if I had missed the signs," she said. "No," I answered. "He's just good at hiding them." And then she said something I hadn't considered. What if we weren't the only ones? That night I couldn't sleep. Her question echoed in my mind. What if we weren't the only ones? It was terrifying and freeing. What if all the quiet stories out there, all the women and men carrying invisible bruises, could find each other? What if truth-telling could become contagious? The next morning I emailed my publisher. "I want to organize a project," I wrote. "A collection, anonymous stories, a chorus of screenshots, a mosaic of survival." They responded with immediate interest. We called it Fragments, a digital anthology of lived experiences, told by those who were never asked for their version. Within a week, we had over 100 submissions. They came in from everywhere: Canada, Brazil, South Africa, Ireland, Turkey, Argentina. Each one a different voice, each one echoing the same thing. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but then I saw someone who looked calm, who didn't yell, who just said it, and I thought, maybe I can too. The project took on a life of its own. Therapists began recommending it to patients. Advocacy groups used it in training. A college professor wrote to ask permission to include it in her course on gender and communication. And slowly it became clear that what I had started was no longer about me. It had outgrown my story. It had become a vessel, a path, a movement. With every day that passed, fragments grew stronger. What started as a quiet project became a flood of voices, voices once silenced, now echoing across continents. The media began calling me, not just an author, but an advocate, a leader, a voice for the voiceless. And that's when the pressure began. Producers reached out, asking for follow-up interviews. Invitations to panels, keynote speeches, even political events began pouring in. People wanted me on morning shows, news specials, talk shows with tearful reunions and dramatic lighting. But I didn't want to be a symbol. I wanted to be real, because once you become a symbol, you stop being human. And I had fought too long, too hard to reclaim my humanity. One afternoon I received an email that made me stop breathing. It was from Derek's PR agency. They were organizing an awareness and reconciliation tour. He wanted to publicly acknowledge past mistakes, engage in a national conversation on accountability, and, unbelievably, invite Julia to join him as a partner in healing. I stared at the screen in disbelief. It was polished. PR perfect, crafted to manipulate public perception. What they wanted wasn't healing. It was control. Control of the narrative. Control of the consequences. I didn't respond, but the silence didn't stop them. The next morning, an article was published with the headline, "Ex-husband seeks redemption. We can heal together," says Derek Taylor. It included flattering, photos of him in soft lighting, quotes about growth, and vague acknowledgments of having learned from pain. There was no mention of what that pain was. No mention of me, or my book, by name. But it was clear what he was trying to do. Reposition. Himself. Rebrand. Turn survival into a duet. My phone buzzed with texts. Friends. Journalists. Strangers. You saw this, right? He's trying to hijack the story. Don't let him take this from you. But I wasn't angry. I was done. And being done didn't mean silence. It meant sovereignty. That evening, I posted a statement on my website and social media. It read, "Survivors don't need their abusers to walk beside them into the light. We don't need joint interviews, redemption tours, or co-authored closure. Healing is not a duet. Healing is a solo act, messy, raw, and real. I wish peace to all who seek it, but I will not sacrifice my truth at the altar of anyone else's PR campaign." Julia Montgomery. It was short, simple, final, and it was shared more than anything I had ever written. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email, an actual letter, handwritten in ink. It was from a woman in Michigan, a retired school teacher. 71 years old, she wrote, "I've lived my whole life under the shadow of someone else's charm. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to ruin his reputation. I didn't want to be dramatic, but now I'm 71, and I don't want to die with this silence still sitting in my chest. Your story cracked something open in me. Thank you for speaking so I could finally breathe." Margaret T.I. cried when I read it, not because I was sad, but because I understood, fully, finally. In the weeks that followed, the public grew louder, but I grew quieter. Not silent, just still, because there was power in not reacting, power in choosing when and how to speak. And sometimes, the greatest answer to manipulation is not a counterattack, it's absence, it's dignity. I spent more time with my son. We started a small garden in the backyard. We laughed more. We talked about normal things. One evening, as we watched the sun dip behind the trees, he turned to me and asked, "Do you think you'll write another book?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe, one day." "Can I help?" I smiled. "You already have." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about fighting anymore, or proving, or correcting headlines. This was about becoming, and I was becoming someone I had never dared to dream I could be. It had been 1 year since I showed the screenshot. 1 year since the courtroom fell silent. Since the judge leaned back in his chair and tilted his head like someone trying to reconcile the truth with what he'd just heard. Since Derek's smile cracked, his jaw twitched, and he realized the mask had finally slipped in public. A year since I walked out of that room, not just divorced, but disentangled. And yet, healing doesn't arrive with a gavel. It doesn't wear a suit. It doesn't announce itself with legal documents or clean conclusions. Healing is quieter, slower, more personal. It arrives on a Tuesday afternoon when you forget to flinch at a sound, on a Sunday morning when your coffee tastes like freedom instead of adrenaline, or late at night when you realize you're no longer rehearsing conversations you'll never have. I had moved into a new place, a small house on a quiet street. It had a wraparound porch and a lemon tree in the backyard. The walls were bare at first, but it felt like mine. Not because I paid for it, but because the silence inside wasn't threatening. It was peaceful. Liam had adjusted well. Better than I expected, really. He had taken the shifts in stride, perhaps because I let him speak when he needed to, and didn't push when he didn't. One evening, as we were painting his bedroom a soft blue, he said, "Mom, are you going to tell your story forever?" I paused mid-stroke. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you still have to tell it, or can you stop now?" It was a thoughtful question, not challenging, just curious. And for the first time, I didn't feel defensive. I didn't need to explain the weight or justify my choices. I just said, "I think I'm almost done telling it. It's starting to live on its own now." He nodded. "Good. I think your story is strong enough to walk without you." Meanwhile, Fragments had grown, beyond me. It was now a non-profit. It had volunteers, chapters in 4 countries, a podcast hosted by a survivor in Argentina. High school teachers used the anonymous entries to start conversations in classrooms. Support groups had formed in cities I'd never even been to. It wasn't mine anymore. And that was the point. Still, there were times when my name was attached to headlines. Sometimes praise, sometimes critique. People like their heroes neat, but survivors are messy. They wanted me strong but not angry, grateful but not too outspoken. Once, I was asked in a radio interview, "Do you think you've forgiven him?" I responded, "Forgiveness isn't a certificate I can print. It's a boundary I maintain." They didn't love that answer, but it was the truth. And then, just when I thought the story had closed, something unexpected happened. One morning, as I dropped Liam off at school, I noticed a familiar figure by the fence. Gray hoodie, shoulders hunched, talking quietly to a woman with a clipboard. His presence pulled at me like a memory with teeth. Derek. I hadn't seen him in almost a year, not in person. There were no legal ties anymore. No pending obligations. He was just there. He didn't see me. But that night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "I saw you at the school. I didn't approach. I didn't want to cause trouble. But I need you to know. I'm sorry. Not for court. For before." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. The next day, he emailed. A longer message. Articulate as always. He acknowledged behaviors, listed therapy milestones, and claimed responsibility, though carefully. There was regret, but also strategy. Vulnerability, but also performance. He ended the email with a question. "Would you consider meeting once, in a public space, for closure?" I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. The door was not only closed, it was bricked over, and behind it I had built something new. But what I did do, for myself, not for him, was write one final entry for Fragments. It wasn't a story, it was a reflection. They say the truth will set you free, but before that, it will test every cell in your body. It will isolate you. It will embarrass you. It will ask you to bleed publicly while others watch silently. But then, it will catch fire. It will burn what was false, and what remains will be you. Not cleaned up, not perfect, but true. JMI didn't sign my full name. I didn't need to anymore. Everyone knew. Months passed. Life steadied. I started writing again. Fiction, this time. Short stories, little moments, nothing about courtrooms or trauma. Just people. Flawed, funny, strange people doing small, brave things. One was about a woman who hid apology letters in books at the library. Another was about a man who thought his dog could understand French. They had nothing to do with me. And yet, somehow, they were more me than anything I'd written before. One morning, Liam came into the kitchen holding a sheet of paper. He had written an essay for school. The title was, "The Strongest Person I Know." I felt a lump rise in my throat before I even read the first line. My mom taught me that strength isn't about yelling louder. It's about knowing when not to speak. She used to cry in the bathroom with the water running. Now she sings while she washes the dishes. She didn't fight my dad with fists or insults. She fought with one screenshot and a calm voice, and that changed everything. She's not just my mom, she's my role model. I couldn't finish the page. I held him. And in that embrace, everything came full circle. There was no final court ruling, no public apology, no parade. There was only this. A boy who had seen the worst and still believed in the best. A woman who had been broken and now baked cinnamon muffins on weekends. A story once used to humiliate, now used to heal. Because in the end, I didn't win in court. I didn't win online. I didn't win with likes or shares or interviews. I won when I no longer needed to win at all. When the battle stopped being about proving anything and started being about living freely.